maybe if you can recognise someone in your organisation who's really poor at communicating, and this should be on their PDP for this
Send
year,
them this episode.
send episode. Just saying. Welcome to How to Take the Lead, the podcast where we challenge the myths and stereotypes of what it means to be a leader today and help you to succeed in post without compromise. I'm Lee Griffith.
And I'm Carrie-Anne Wade, and together we will be your guides, questioning everything we've ever learnt about leadership, sharing our experiences along the way, and inspiring you to make a real impact in your role.
Visit howtotakethelead.com for show notes, past episodes, and to join our community.
Enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of How to Take the Lead. If you are listening to this and you don't already subscribe, please hit the subscribe button. If you're watching us, hello, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you're listening to this and you're hearing about watching us, yes, we are on YouTube.
This gets ever more complicated.
I know. A few other bits of admin just before we get into the meat of today's episode. We're on Insta and Twitter at How to Take the Lead, so we're having some great conversations over there. And we also have our Substack community, and that is you get extra behind the scenes of episodes and some of our reflections post-episode, a few coaching prompts, this, that and the other. Book club starting soon. We're going to have We're going to have some Ask Us Anything sessions, so just for that community.
Please be kind to us.
Through. So lots of good stuff over there. All the links that you need for all the different things we've talked about are all at howtotakethelead.com. So get over there. Also in the show notes on whatever device you're listening to, we'll put all the links that you need to know. So I think that is really open and transparent communications to start the episode.
It is.
How are you doing today?
I'm all right. I am slightly giddy with excitement and anticipation as we're recording this with exactly 4 weeks to go until I get married. It's very exciting. I've avoided too much wedding chat.
I thought you were going to say you were excited with anticipation of the Luther movie. But the wedding is more important.
The wedding is more important. The Luther movie's happened, but I've been promised no spoilers, so I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm not going to communicate about that. I could communicate for hours about wedding planning and all things bridal and marriage excitement, but I won't, because that's not what we're here to talk about today.
No. It'll be on the Insta though, won't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is content.
Probably. Everything is content.
So we've dropped a few hints, but today's topic is something that we're both really passionate about, and that's communications and engagement. Now, I can feel people rolling their eyes because they probably think we're a bit biased because of our backgrounds. And between us, I know we don't look old enough, but between us, we've got 40 years of work. I know.
I'm glad it's between us, definitely between us. My God, that's frightening.
40 years of working in communications and engagement. So it is something that we're both really passionate about. But actually, this isn't some shameless plug for a communications team or communications function. We do think they're really important services that every organisation needs. Actually, we're coming at this, as we always do in every episode of How to Take the Lead, we're coming at it from a slightly different angle, and we want to tackle the things that happen outside of the comms function, because I see this all the time, and I'll be really interested in your thoughts in a minute, Carrie-Anne, where senior leadership teams put the burden of communications onto a corporate function, and they don't realise they've got a responsibility. You could argue the biggest responsibility to communicate and engage with their people and their communities. So today's discussion is exploring why it's important, what a leader needs to consider, and some practical tips to get you started along the way. So let's start with the basics of what we mean by communications and engagement from a leadership perspective. Carrie-Anne, over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to try not to waffle because there's so much in this question. And I know you'll have plenty to add as well, Lee. But for me, from a leadership perspective, when we talk about communications, we are clearly, hopefully people will realise that we are talking about things like a leader setting out their vision, their direction, their strategy. But I think the really crucial bit for me isn't just about talking. It isn't just about sharing information one way. It's also about listening and engaging. It's about relationship building with your key stakeholders. It's about building trust. It's about visibility. And by visibility, I kind of mean visibility as a leader and a sort of physical person that you are, but also that visibility around issues, like things that are important to you, to your stakeholders. It's about sort of being present, being kind of finger on the pulse with what's important to the people that you're leading and being able to demonstrate that. It's about approachability. It's about role modeling. My list could go on and on and on and on. But hopefully what it demonstrates is that it isn't, like you said before, about that, oh, well, we've got a team to do this and we're just pushing some information out. It's definitely not that for me.
No.
I'm sure there's more that you want to add, Lee, in that space.
I think that was a pretty comprehensive list. I think the flip side of that, it's not the transactional stuff. Yes, there are transactional things that you do as a leader that you're communicating with other people, but it more than the transactional stuff that's happening. So yeah, I completely agree with everything that you've said. I think it's about how you are attuned to what's happening in your organization, the context in which you're operating, how you contextualize the stuff that you're doing to that environment, and you're recognizing and responding to the needs of the people that you serve, whether that's your staff, your communities, your stakeholders, or whomever.
Oh, you said that so much more articulate. I can't even speak. I can't even articulate what I'm trying to say. Basically, you said that so much better than me is what I was trying to say, Lee. You communicated that far better than I did.
So for me, your communications impact as a leader has an absolute direct correlation to how well your organization performs. For me, it's the difference between a great and a poor rating, how engaged your staff are, what experience your customers or your clients have with you as an organization, what your communities and stakeholders think of you. And I think you look at those great performing organizations, they have leadership teams who communicate and connect people we serve. And it isn't just an afterthought and it isn't left for someone else to do. And there's, the stats show that this does really matter. So 74% of employees expect their leader to use social media, for example, to communicate. So 3/4 of staff, almost half of staff in the UK will look at a chief exec's social media account, for example, when they're considering joining a company. And things like direct and transparent communications from an employer is the third most important factor for staff after compensation and benefits. And obviously this matters more the younger the workforce is. That we've talked about multi-generational workforces. So it's only ever going to get more important. And we touched on the fact that, communicating isn't just an outpouring of stuff that you do or the transactional stuff, nor is it about assuming you only tell people what you think they need to know. It's part of your strategy. It's your brand. It tells people everything that they need to know about you. And I suppose it's, for me, really frustrating when you see leaders who don't understand the importance of it, or they think their job is just to do a tell and sell. And we see that quite a lot with some leaders. And there's so much more to it than that. So I want to ask, kind of, why do you think it's not taken as seriously as other part of a leader's role?
Oh, I've got a massive list here as well. So you'll have to be really good at chairing before I get on one and just run through a billion things that are on my mind about this. So I think that this is quite multifaceted, and I think it will depend sometimes on the type of leader you are. And the culture in your organisation as well. The first thing I'll get out of the way is that bit, the point that you've already made around communications being labelled and badged as something that a function has to deliver. So I do still think there is a bit of an attitude that to communicate anything within your organisation, that happens through your corporate comms function. And I don't know if that's because of laziness, lack of understanding, a leadership mindset that's maybe not quite forward thinking enough, but I definitely think there is still a bit of that goes on. I also think that I'm not sure whether it's about how seriously it's taken or whether it's about how confident people feel in doing it. So we've talked before in a couple of our episodes around confidence, but also around sort of fear. And I think maybe if leaders are not feeling confident in what they stand for, their purpose, the way in which they want to come across as a leader, that can impact on how well or how much emphasis people put on that part of their role as a leader in terms of communication. So it might be fear of getting it wrong and saying the wrong thing, fear of putting your head above the parapet and putting yourself out there around an issue. It might be that just physically you're not particularly confident as a communicator. It maybe feels stressful and anxiety inducing for you to speak publicly about things. I would partly question how you've managed to get into a leadership role without being able to do some of that, but absolutely respect that some people are not confident in certain aspects of what they see as communicating. It might also be a worry or a fear about what you might hear. So if you are positioning yourself as a leader who is open and transparent and approachable and all of those things that we've said, and you're creating dialogue and you're engaging with stakeholders, that's great, as long as you're prepared for what you might hear and what you might be asked to take action on. And sometimes if you're fearful about that and nervous and worried, it kind of stops you wanting to kind of be that open and transparent communicator, I think. And the final bit I will say, because I could go on forever and there are loads more things, is I sometimes think it's about confusion. There being a sort of state of confusion where maybe as a leader, either individually or the leadership in your organisation is perhaps lacking some clarity, whether that's clarity of vision, clarity of purpose, clarity around sort of the strategic direction that you're heading in. If you don't have that clarity, then it makes it very difficult to communicate in an open and transparent way and engage people and build that trust, because you're not really sure what it is that you're communicating, if that makes sense. So I will stop there because I could go on forever, because I'd really like to hear your views, Lee.
Well, I don't disagree with any of the reasons that you've listed, but I do also want to recognise that there is a set of leaders where I don't agree that it's a confidence issue. I think it's an arrogance issue, as they know best.
The opposite. Nice, yeah.
There's either a power dynamic at play. They're trying to keep information. They don't want to let people know because they want to kind of keep control. Or there's this sense of they think they know what people need to know and what they don't need to know, and they will tell people when they need to tell them, and they just don't see the value of having open conversations and engaging with people because they've got clarity on what needs to happen. And I think that's the kind of leaders that damage the culture and I suppose has a bad rep for other leaders who perhaps do lack confidence.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think that's a really important point to raise. And again, I would question that need for that control and where that's coming from. So is that about the mindset of that individual leader? Is it like totally ego driven? Like you say, that sort of arrogance and potentially ego driven. Is it about the culture of that organization? So yeah, I don't disagree with that point that you've made, that there's definitely some of that. And I wonder if some of that is driven through a sort of leadership mindset, again, that underneath it all is actually quite fear-based, because actually it's like, if I give up the control and I am more open and more transparent and I engage more people and I enable others to be part of this, and it shifts the kind of direction of travel for the organisation, like, why would I not want that to happen? Is it because I'm frightened? Does that mean that I feel less powerful if other people, are able to have that autonomy and to support and help shape the direction of the organisation? So I think there's probably quite a lot underneath underneath it, if you scratch the surface of
Yeah.
those leaders who do lead through just being ego driven and power centric, and that age old sort of, to use that phrase, is it like doctor knows best? It's almost like, well, I know best, so we're just doing it this way. Like what's
Yeah.
driving that sort of behavior? But that's possibly another episode in itself.
But you've also got, I mean, I do DISC assessments with leaders that look at their different communications and styles and stuff. And you've read that book, Surrounded by Idiots, which also
Yes, by
picks up the
Thomas
different
Erickson.
colours.
Yeah.
And that has the D, the directive leader. I think that's a red, is it?
It's a red. It's a red in the book.
Yeah,
yeah, the opposite of me. I'm a green.
Yeah. Just getting that out there. I'm not a red.
I'm a green. I'm not a red. Doesn't mean I couldn't sometimes do with being slightly more red, but that's again.
But the red leaders, or the D leaders in DISC, the directive leaders, sometimes they're driven by pace and an impatience because they want to deliver, and they want and feel they need to deliver quickly. They think communications takes time, and they don't have time to communicate. They just want people to do, again, another D word.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting dynamic as well. And understanding your personality type really plays into how you handle those kind of things.
And I think we've all worked with those people, haven't we, alongside those people who want to move at pace. And there's part of me that can understand their perception. Pace. Can we put that in the banish box? The banish box is back at working at pace. Let's progress that at pace. We see that in leaders, and I can kind of see why they would then have that assumption that actually communicating and engaging with people is going to hold that up and make things go slower. But fundamentally, my experience has been what I see time after time, where I have worked with people that have just bulldozed straight through and been like, no, this is what we're doing. I don't need to engage people because it won't happen quick enough. Is that it gets held up at a different part of the process when people then go, I'm not engaging in this. Actually, I don't agree with this. Actually, I'm going to challenge this because I don't feel like I was part of the decision-making process or the journey to get here. And you're so reliant on your stakeholders, whomever they may be, clients, staff, whomever, to actually help you reach that end result, that by not communicating and engaging with them, I feel like you're just storing up a problem for later on, further down the track.
Couldn't agree more. The work I do with leaders, we tend to focus on 3 areas, and I think they go hand in hand. And you've touched on some of these things already. And I think if you don't manage these in the right way, then the impact can cause real issues. So there's that clarity of strategy, which you mentioned. So if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, how are you going to get other people to follow you? And often leaders think about, oh, well, we've got our organisational strategy sorted, but there's a difference between organisational strategy and your personal leadership strategy, and what you're trying to achieve as a leader. Then you've got the self-management piece, and we've talked about that quite a lot in the last episode, but understanding your boundaries, how you organise yourself, how you stay in touch with what's happening in your organisation, how you ensure alignment across teams. And then you've got the communications piece. And for me, that's like the how of how you convey your strategy and how you're going to manage yourself and the situations around you. And that's what your day-to-day work is, really, what your messaging is, who you're trying to engage with, what's your rhythm of communications. And I'm sure we'll touch on that in a little bit, so that you can build trust and reliability. And I think if you don't have those 3 elements nailed as a leader, then that's where the struggles really come into play. And you see that when leaders fail, because usually it's they've not taken people with them, as you've just indicated, that to deliver that vision and strategy, because you've marched off in one direction and you've not checked that other people are going in the same way, and often they're going up a different hill. B, if you're kind of chaotic in the way that you manage yourself, then you create this sense of mistrust and disruption amongst people. And C, that then also shows up in your communications, or your lack of communications, in what you say, how you say it, how you have empathy, how you listen, how you show vulnerability, how you trust. So for me, those are the 3 things. And that's why communications is so vital, because it's the thing that underpins everything that you do as a leader. If you don't have clarity of your strategy, if you don't have that self-management, what are you communicating? So I'd kind of want to get your thoughts on that, Carrie-Anne. And is that something that you've perhaps recognised?
Yes. Yes, it is definitely.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's a quick answer to the question. But I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like if any one of those three things is off, is a bit off, I don't quite know how else to describe it. It has an impact on the other two, and it
Yeah.
mostly has an impact on that communications and engagement piece for me, because I think if you don't have that clarity as a leader around sort of vision, direction of travel, what your strategy is, both, as you say, personally as a leader and organisationally, then it's really hard to communicate anything that's meaningful and engage people in things that are meaningful. I think if you are not clear on sort of how you're managing yourself and how you want to come across as a leader and how you're presenting and showing up as a leader and setting your boundaries, then again, I think it can cause that kind of real state of like, what's this person all about? And if it's not aligned actually to the clarity of strategy piece as well,
Yeah.
that can be really awkward. So, I've worked with leaders who are dictators and it's their way or no way. And that's very challenging, both in terms of your role as another leader in that organization, but also for the organization as a whole. I think that doesn't help with the building of trust. I think it makes people feel disempowered. I think it makes them feel like they don't necessarily always believe what that leader is communicating to them, because I think people who tune into that level of like, we're in a bit of a dictatorship here, just feel that sense of like, am I just being told what that person thinks I need to hear to be able to get on and do the job? I also worked in organizations where a lot of the leaders have been probably maybe more people pleasers if we talked about the green, but sometimes you can go too far that way. So there's something about wanting to be a compassionate leader and that being part of your leadership style and approach and strategy, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to show up as a human. But sometimes if you go too far down that route without the clarity of purpose, strategy, direction, travel, actually people think you're really nice, but they're not really very clear what's happening in the organisation. Where are we heading? What do we need to do to deliver this? So I think there's a real balance to be struck between kind of all of those three aspects. But as you say, the comms piece for me is the bit that is the kind of then how you present all of that, how you're showing up, how you're engaging with people. And if you're not clear on, if you don't have the clarity and you don't have the boundaries and that self-management piece, I just think that becomes really difficult to do.
Yeah. And that's why you can't just rely on a corporate team to do it for you, because it is so intertwined into your leadership approach and style. And it is how you do of your job as a leader. And if you kind of outsource that to someone else, A, it's not going to be authentic. And B, it's yeah, well, B is the same as not being authentic. It's people aren't going to see when they interact with you, they're not going to see the you that's being communicated through the corporate team. So then that creates that it breaks that trust, doesn't it?
Yeah, it becomes very disingenuous then, doesn't it? And like, if everything that's coming out through the organisation is, one style, one approach, whatever, and then actually when somebody meets you as a person, you come across completely differently. That's, that lack of authenticity, and I think demonstrates almost a lack of integrity for people, doesn't it? And they're like, hang on, this doesn't ring true to my experience so far. Cat's Pyjamas empowers communications professionals to grow and thrive in their careers through mentoring, collaboration, and community. I'm Carrie-Anne, and I'm passionate about supporting you to reach the next level of your communications career. Book a free 30-minute discovery call and we can talk over how working together will re-energise and refresh your strategies and approach, helping you reach your goals, whatever they may be. We'll focus on what's important to you right now and how I can help you take action to move forward and grow. If you're ready to feel empowered and take the next steps in your communications journey, then visit cats-pyjamas.co.uk to book your discovery call.
So getting a bit practical, you might be listening to this and go, well, I have a team meeting where I tell people what to do. I send regular emails. I don't have a problem with my communications or my communication style. My question to you is, where's your evidence that what you're doing works? So what's your staff survey saying? What about your customer or your client feedback? Have you done any stakeholder perception work, for example, to see what people in your wider communities think about you and your leadership style? And just because you think you've disseminated a message doesn't mean it's been received. Then you look at your bigger metrics. So operational performance, staff morale, customer satisfaction, reputation. All of those are warning signs, if they're not going in the right direction, that you've got a problem with your communication and your connection. Maybe your teams aren't aligned. Maybe there are underlying cultural issues. And those are things that you can't ignore. And communications are usually at the root cause of that. And there is a direct correlation for me between, I suppose, the style of your communications and the channels you use, and then the trust that you build through that process. So often I see leaders who overly rely on email as the way that they communicate with people because they think it's quick and easy, and then they've got an audit trail of what's been said. But the research shows is pretty low down on the trust scale. So I find it really interesting that leaders overly rely on that, but yet it's one of the least trusted methods when you look at what employees and people trust in terms of ways of communicating. So for me, it's about how do you vary your approach and your methods whilst being consistent with the types of messages you're trying to get across. And you need to, I think we've mentioned this in a previous episode, communicate a lot more than you ever think you need to do. And you might get bored with a message, but that doesn't mean that everyone else has heard it. And I say all that to say, when I talk to leaders about improving their communications, this sense, going back to our last episode, this sense of overwhelm creeps in because it's all this extra work that they suddenly need to do, and they can't just rely on sending emails out or having a team meeting. How are they going to fit it all in? How are they going to be consistent? And my simple answer to that is, this isn't an add-on or a luxury. It is part of your day job. And if you do it well, you save yourself the time and hassle, as you mentioned earlier. You know, you sometimes you're just storing up problems if you ignore it and try and rush forward with something. So the important bit for me is about, how do you establish a rhythm so people know what to expect from you and can manage, your own commitments in that way. So I'm interested to know, Carrie-Anne, what's worked for you and the leaders that you support in terms of setting up that communications rhythm?
Can I just touch on, before I get into
Go
that,
on.
the point
Yes.
you made about email being like the least trusted method of communication? And I reflect on that and think that's probably because most people know that it wasn't you that wrote it. And I'm not doing a disservice to my own team and my own profession, because sometimes that is stuff that comms teams are asked to do. But I think people know that now. People genuinely don't believe that chief execs and other leaders are sat writing all staff emails about various different topics. And I wonder if sometimes that's where a bit of that distrust, or like, it's not the preferred you're not seeing the whites of somebody's eyes, are you? And you're potentially thinking someone else has crafted that for them and they've just topped and tailed it, and ping, away you go. And it's like, that was just my reflection as you said that. But
although saying that, I used to I always used to have to bite my tongue when I'd go out into the organisation when people would go, "Oh, so and so, the chief exec's message went out this week. Oh, they're so wonderful. It's such a great message. They really understand." And I'm like, okay,
that was
they're
me.
great, aren't they? Yeah. Just because I'd nailed their tone of voice.
Yeah. Anyhow, sorry, we digress a little bit, but you talked about kind of rhythm, and for me is that consistency is key. I think it's I absolutely agree with what you said about, like, you can't show up too much in this space in terms of communicating with your organization and with your stakeholders, because just because you've said it once doesn't mean people have actually even been in the room to hear it. So there's something about that consistency. There's something for me about setting expectations up front as well, about how you're going to be making yourself available to people, how people can engage with you, how you are going to act on the conversations and communication and connection you build. And if you're not, being upfront about the why not, because you will you will hear things through some of this engagement where people want you to take action on stuff that perhaps you're just not going to be able to for whatever reason, doesn't fit with the strategic direction of travel, you don't have the budget to do it, it's not a priority right now. But I think you have to be willing to be open and transparent about feeding some of that back for sure.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's a bit for me about being yourself. Don't try and be someone that you're not. And I've seen good and bad examples of this, mostly in organisations where senior leaders have left the organisation and people get opportunities to act up into that senior leadership space. And the people who've been most successful have been the people that have been themselves and have been genuine in the way that they have interacted and communicated and shown up, and that they haven't just tried to be the person that's left, as in like the director of such and such is gone. They were perceived to be hugely successful, so I must just be like them as a leader. That's so disingenuous and people see through it straight away. And it's actually really hard work. It's quite exhausting to try and be somebody that you're not. So I would say there's something in there for me about just making sure you know who you are, what you stand for as a leader, how you want to show up, and just be consistent in acting with that integrity and that authenticity. In terms of really practical things, it's interesting, isn't it? Because some organisations are huge. So that's where I think that reliance on email probably comes from, because actually it might not always be possible for quite a small senior leadership team or your one chief exec to be physically present in all the places they could be. But that doesn't mean that you can't put things in place to start to try and address some of that. So really practically, like, are you going to go out once or twice a week doing visits to teams or visiting different client groups or stakeholders externally? And are you going to do that consistently and show up? Are you going to feed back from that? Are you going to feed back to those people as well as sharing that more broadly? One of the things that has been remarkably well received in my current organisation is actually through the pandemic, we set up a weekly webinar, and the chief exec and all of the executive directors were on that weekly webinar through the pandemic, sharing updates, information, hearing concerns from colleagues and responding to them in real time. And we're not able to respond, we're saying we'll go away and find an answer, and next week this is where we'll be sharing that answer with you. And it proved to be hugely popular, and it hasn't stopped. And actually we're 3 years down the line, and every Wednesday at midday our senior leadership team are on that webinar. If they can't make it because one's on holiday, whatever, a deputy comes who can answer questions about that portfolio. And it's become, for our particular organisation, a really important way for our leaders to be visible and accountable into the organisation. And I know it's online and it's not in person, but it's in real time. People are seeing the whites of their eyes, almost sometimes pixelated, sadly. But I think people in our organisation have really valued that access to the leadership team and the transparency, and the fact that actually whatever comment or question gets raised in that hour, they have to respond to. There's not a right, we can go away and have a discussion about how we. So I think that's really helped in terms of that building trust internally for our organisation, for sure. One of the other things I just wanted to touch on, and you mentioned it actually in a previous bit of the conversation, was around stakeholder feedback. And, do you know what your stakeholders think of you? Because quite often I think we can be focused internally on our own staff. And actually, again, for me, that's something that feels really important. And it's been a challenge for me when I've worked in organisations who either have assumed they know what their stakeholders think, so therefore haven't bothered to ask, just crack on merrily, or have asked what stakeholders think, have received the sort of evidence that tells you, and not always more in the space where it's not maybe been great, it's been something to be worked on, and then sort of gone, oh, well, we knew that anyway. And it's almost like, well, if you did know that anyway, why have you not taken action to address it? Because actually now you've got the evidence that says your stakeholders think you could be much better at X, or whatever the improvement thing is. It's usually in that space where there's an improvement. Oh yeah, but we've known that for years, so why have you not wanted to act on it? So that bit I find it a little bit frustrating as well. So I think, if you are going to seek out the evidence, make sure you use it, and make sure that you take action. Don't just use it as an opportunity to go, oh, well, it's told us what we already know, and then be complacent and just sit on your laurels. There's something for me about if you're going to be open, you're going to communicate, you're going to build connections, like the so what, you have to do something. It's not just for fun.
And you need to determine that from the outset. This is very strategic, because it's got to align with what your vision is, what your organisational vision is. And, you know, you don't just go out to be visible. You go out with a purpose. You have a purpose of what it is you're trying to test, or what questions you're trying to ask, how that's going to inform the decision making that you're going to take that week, that month, or whatever. And everything's a continual loop, isn't it? It feeds into, right, and then what, and then what, and then what. And I think often leaders can go into this, right, I'm in the here and now, what do I have to say? And it doesn't work like that. You need to have that forward look of, this is where I need to get to, this is where I want to get to, how am I going to navigate that? What are the things that I need to be asking questions about and testing to feed into my thinking? How am I going to double check that what I'm hearing is the right thing as well, and that I'm not just taking it for granted? How do I then communicate back what I'm hearing and what I'm going to do about it as a result? And so it's a continual cycle. And I used to do in my corporate life, and also now with my business, I work individually with leaders, and we build their own personal communications and engagement plans. So we work out, well, what's your narrative? Who's your specific audience? What's the evidence you're trying to get? What are your messages? What actions do you need to take, and how do you measure your effectiveness? And we map out what meetings they might need to go to, what events they might need to attend, where they might need to fill the gaps with walkabouts or stuff like that you've spoken around. What their messaging and talking points for those different interventions. And a lot of that can be planned in advance, and then making sure you've got a regular check-in on, well, what am I hearing? What am I learning? Where do I need to adapt my messaging or my approach? So it's a massive strategic thing that you have to take responsibility. I'd say before you even enter into your role as a leader, you need to be thinking through, and then you need to be doing this as a regular exercise. It can't be left to your PA. It can't be left to, say, a comms team to do it for you, because you've got to be proactively managing that.
I think, that approach is so important that you've talked about, and it's just made me reflect on a leader that I used to work with, who used to do breakfast sessions around the organisation. Honestly, it's making my skin crawl a little bit now thinking about it, because it was breakfast with the chief exec, opportunity to have a frank, open conversation, turn up, have a cup of tea, ask anything, have a pastry. And the chief exec used to say before every session, I'm not prepared to talk about this, or this though. So what? Like, yeah, well, I'm not gonna. If anyone asks about that, you'll just have to tell them as the comms person that that's not what we're here to talk about. But we've built this as like open, free forum for people to bring anything they want. We haven't built it as, you can only come and talk about X, Y, and Z, and if you mention A, B, and C, it's not going to happen. So for me, it's just like that. You know, really, you have to really want to do it, and not to manipulate it to your own means. And I guess that goes right back to conversations about why leaders don't take communication seriously, and if they're those power hungry, ego driven, arrogant style of leader, then that's just a huge example of that. Like, I'm not going to talk to you about this.
What? And what's betting that they've picked up that as a notion of something they should do because they've seen another chief exec do it in another organisation and it's worked really well. But what they haven't got behind is, well, what was their strategy in doing it? Yeah. How do they use the information? What do they do next?
What's the purpose of
it?
Yeah.
They've just taken the action as, oh, that looks great, and the optics will look great if I say I do this.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's optics.
And I think that's part of the problem with when, you know, I'm a huge advocate of leaders being on social media, but I don't, you know, I'm not saying get yourself a TikTok account and start dancing. That isn't perhaps going to meet your objectives. And do you know what I mean?
Sorry.
Oh, I've got the giggles now.
I've got the giggles, sorry.
But it's about finding, yes, you need a variety of methods,
Yeah.
but it isn't just looking at, oh, well, this was successful here, I'm just going to copy that without understanding your why. It isn't about, because if you're not actually invested, as you've just said, what's the point
What's
of
the
doing it?
point?
Because there's
What's the
certain
point?
things they don't want to do. As soon as it gets challenging, you disengage. If all you're going to do, if you set up a Twitter account, because every chief exec or every other leader's on Twitter, but all you do is retweet what your organisation says and you never actually engage in conversation, what's the point of you being on there?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, we had a little soapbox moment then.
We did.
And a little bit of therapy. And a dance.
So to wrap this up, because again, it's another meaty one, which we could talk about forever. And I think we've both kind of demonstrated how passionately we feel about this, and we do think it is the difference between those organisations that are truly great and those that just pretend to be. Sorry, that was a bit cutting. But on how to, where should a leader be focusing if they want to improve how they communicate and engage with people?
I'm going to go with clarity and consistency. So clarity of vision, mission, purpose, strategy, organisational and personal. Clarity about who you are as a leader, how you want to come across, what your approach is going to be, and then just consistently showing up, consistently sharing those messages, consistently engaging with people. They're going to be my two C's.
Yeah, love it. Mine's very similar. You need to understand that whole know, like, and trust. If you're only there doing one-way communications, yes, you might raise some awareness of who you are, but you're not going to build trust, and you're not going to make change happen. So you've got to look at the whole flow of the types of things you're doing, and you need to recognize that not everyone's the same. So you need to vary your approach, but in a way that feels realistic and authentic to you and your style. So if you're not someone that is comfortable being on video, don't be on video, do a bloody podcast. There are ways around it, but you've got the 7 different learning styles that everyone will fit into one or two of those different styles. You need, as a leader, need to be showing up across that breadth, because not everyone, just like you personally, won't receive information very well in certain ways. You need to recognize that your audiences, your stakeholders, aren't going to receive everything. So just get off the email. That's it.
Get off the email, the end.
Anyway, that is, well, as I say, we could be going on forever.
I know. I feel like that was such a whistle stop. Like, woo!
I know. I'm sure we'll revisit. We'd love to hear your views on the topic, maybe some of the challenges that you have in communicating, and what you see some of the barriers are from a leadership perspective. Maybe you feel maybe the counter argument to that is that you feel too restricted by policies and procedures in your organisation. We haven't even gone there with maybe some of the barriers a leader might face. So we'd love to hear what your views are on the topic. You can get involved on Instagram, on Twitter, on the conversation, YouTube, Substack. Visit howtotakethelead.com to get all the various links and get involved in the conversation. And if you like this episode, or maybe if you can recognise someone in your organisation who's really poor at communicating, and this should be on their PDP for this year,
send them this episode.
Just saying. Anyway, see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode.
Don't forget to hit follow and share the show with someone you know. Oh, that rhymes.
A rating or review will be much appreciated.
If you're looking for some leadership inspiration, why not get a free copy of our recommended reading list? Visit howtotakethelead.com to download.
Until next week, get out there and take the lead.